Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into a topic that has really reshaped the whole landscape of personal security and finance identity piracy.
Right.
For so long, we sort of treated identity theft as this niche crime, a stolen wallet, a fraudulent credit card charge. But the sources you shared for this deep dive, they reveal a criminal ecosystem that is it's vast, it's specialized, and honestly, way more insidious than that simple definition.
That's absolutely right. The listener shared a stack of material that moves so far beyond the headline-grabbing one-off breaches.
Yeah.
We're dealing with what the material calls, well, a few different things. Identity theft, identity piracy, or identity infringement.
Right, different names for a similar problem.
Exactly. And our mission today is to give you a clear, synthesized map of this terrain. We're going to distinguish the 7 faces of modern identity theft and, explore why each one really demands a different kind of defensive posture.
And the core definition here is really important for setting the scope. This is the deliberate use of someone else's personal identifying information, or PII.
Right.
The PII, everything from their name and date of birth to electronic signatures, even fingerprints, all of it used without permission, specifically to commit fraud or other crimes. It's really the weaponization of our personal data.
It is. And it's fascinating how recent this all is, at least as a concept. The term identity theft was only coined back in 1964.
Wow, that recent.
That recent. But in the decades since, the theft and use of PII have just exploded into a global economic engine for criminal groups.
And PII is the currency here, so we should probably clarify just how diverse that currency has become. It's not just your social security number anymore.
No, not at all. The research details this huge, expanding list of vulnerable data points. Your name, date of birth, SSN, bank account numbers, credit card numbers, PINs.
Electronic signatures, biometric data like fingerprints.
And, of course, passwords. Anything that gives someone access to your money or your unique status, your digital self, basically, that's PII.
And this brings us to a really important nuance that I think gets lost in the public conversation. The link between a massive data breach and immediate, individual identity theft.
Yes. This is a critical point. When you see a headline announcing a breach that affects millions of people, the immediate panic is that, widespread identity theft is already happening to all of them.
But the reality, according to the research we looked at, it's a lot more complex, isn't it?
It's much more complex. There was a U.S. Government Accountability Office study that noted that most breaches have not resulted in detected incidents of identity theft.
So if your data is stolen, but the immediate fraud rate is low, what's happening? Is the data just sitting in a file somewhere?
That's the million-dollar question. And one study even reported that the probability of you becoming a victim as a direct result of a specific data breach is only around 2%.
2%. That seems incredibly low.
It does, but that low number doesn't mean the risk is gone. It just means it's not immediate. It underscores a critical point. The theft of the information, the breach, isn't always followed right away by the fraud, the identity theft itself.
So it's delayed.
It's delayed weaponization. The stolen data might be old, it might be incomplete, or, and this is the key, it might be sitting with a criminal organization that's waiting.
Waiting for what?
Waiting to aggregate it with other data, or just waiting for the right time or the right group of victims to maximize their profit. The sources are really careful to warn that the full scope of these delayed consequences is, well, it's largely an unknown.
So our mission today is to move past those high-level stats and really understand the different types of attacks.
Exactly. And the real-world, sometimes decade-long consequences that follow.
That distinction you made between the theft of information and the weaponization of identity, I think that's the perfect foundation for this dive. So let's start with how these crimes scale. Section 1 focuses on exactly that, when cybercrime gets easy.
The technological shift toward accessible, high-impact cybercrime is, I think, maybe the most worrying trend. The material quotes Gunter Ullman, who summed it up brilliantly. He said, "Interested in credit card theft? There's an app for that."
That framing from, specialized coding to just an app that says so much about how low the barrier to entry has become. We're not talking about needing to be some kind of master coder anymore.
Not at all. And the Zeus malicious software is the prime example of this. Zeus is a type of crimeware that is incredibly hacker-friendly. It's basically a toolkit that even inexperienced hackers can use to pull off large-scale financial crime.
So what does that toolkit actually do? How does it get the PII?
Zeus is a very sophisticated Trojan horse,
Yeah.
and it's designed specifically to steal banking information. It uses key logging to record what you type when you enter your bank login.
Okay.
And it uses something called form grabbing, which intercepts data you submit in web forms before it gets encrypted.
So it can just harvest credit card info, important documents.
And this is a critical escalation of risk mentioned in the sources documents necessary for homeland security, things like digital passport files or internal government PII.
The moment you link PII theft to Homeland Security documents, you've moved this crime from the business section of the newspaper straight to the national security section.
Absolutely. If a hacker gets that level of information, the consequences could range from massive financial identity theft to facilitating espionage or even terrorism. The sources are very clear. ID theft is a facilitator. It's a foundational crime that funds or enables other, even more severe crimes.
Like illegal immigration, terrorism.
Phishing campaigns, espionage, it's the fuel for the engine of organized crime.
And to get a handle on the sheer scale, the Material Sites and ITAC estimate that about 15 million Americans had their identity stolen way back in 2012.
Right. And that figure, even being a decade old, shows how pervasive this issue was before a lot of these sophisticated tools became even easier to use.
That 15 million number, it really helps us understand why we need to categorize the damage. It confirms this is not a small, localized problem. It is a mass, digitized threat.
Which is why just thinking of it as stolen credit is completely insufficient.
This leads us right into the heart of it all. If the tools make the crime easy, let's look at where the perpetrators are aiming their efforts. Identity theft is a spectrum. We're going to dive into the core material now and break down the distinct categories. Our sources lay this out as the 7 distinct faces of stolen identity.
And this is where we stop generalizing and really start analyzing the specific mechanics of the crime and its impact on the victim and on society.
We'll start with the most familiar territory, Section 2.1, Financial and Tax Identity Theft, the common thread.
Financial identity theft is, it's the most common type. It's using another person's identity to get credit, loans, goods, services. This is the one that usually shows up first when the victim gets a bill or a collection notice for something they never bought.
Or a notice that a new credit line was opened in their name.
Exactly. But it's sibling crime, tax identity theft, that's where the bureaucracy really becomes a weapon against you.
How does that specific scheme work? What's the method?
Tax identity theft relies heavily on 2 things: speed and the victim's social security number. The standard method is for a thief to use the victim's real PII name, address, SSN, to file a fraudulent tax return super early in the filing season.
Before the real person gets a chance to.
Right. The thief claims a huge refund and has the IRS deposit it into an account they control, which is often just a prepaid debit card.
And the victim only finds out when they go to file their legitimate return, and the IRS system just kicks it back saying, a return has already been filed for that SSN. I can't imagine the nightmare of trying to untangle that.
It creates a massive burden of proof for the victim. But there's a second risk here that's just as damaging: the employment-related scheme.
What's that?
A thief can use the victim's SSN to get a job they couldn't otherwise get. The employer reports the income to the IRS under the victim's SSN, and all of a sudden the real taxpayer has this huge income discrepancy.
So the IRS flags their account and demands taxes on money they never earned.
Exactly. So now the victim has to prove they didn't file the fraudulent return and prove they didn't work at the job the thief used their SSN for. It's a long, long road to getting clear.
It sounds like it. What's the solution?
Well, the IRS recognized this vulnerability and developed a response. The victim has to file Form 14039, the identity theft affidavit.
Okay.
Once the IRS validates their claim, the victim is issued an Identity Protection Personal Identification Number, or an IPPN.
An IPPN.
It's a 6-digit code that permanently replaces their SSN just for tax filing.
So that IPPN is basically like a 2-factor authentication for the whole tax system. It's an admission that the SSN alone is just not a secret anymore.
Precisely. It hardens their defense against future tax fraud because it recognizes that their main identifier has been permanently exposed.
Let's move on to a type that completely changes the battlefield. Section 2.2. Criminal identity theft. We're leaving the financial world now and entering the legal system.
And this is a truly devastating form of identity theft. The consequences are immediate, and they're legal. It happens when a criminal fraudulently identifies themselves to law enforcement at the moment they're arrested.
And they do that using a fake or stolen ID.
Right. They might have a fake driver's license they bought or one they stole.
So that means the charges Any warrants, a failure to appear history. It all gets filed under the victim's name. How does a victim even find out about this?
They often find out through these incredibly stressful, indirect ways, and usually long after it's happened. They might get a court summons for a felony they never committed, or, and this is a more common example, they get stopped for a routine traffic violation only to find out their license has been suspended because of an outstanding warrant in a state they've never even been to.
Or a background check for a new job fails.
That's the worst. Suddenly a potential employer sees a list of offenses that aren't theirs.
And once your identity is tangled up with the criminal justice system, I have to imagine that proving you're innocent is exponentially harder than clearing up a bad credit report.
It is exponentially more difficult.
Okay.
The victim gets thrown into this incredibly complex bureaucratic fight. To clear their record, they usually have to track down the original arresting officers.
If they can even find them.
Right. Then they have to prove their true identity through modern, reliable means like fingerprinting or maybe even DNA testing, and then go through the whole process of getting the court records formally expunged.
But the research points out this terrifying, lasting impact. Even if you convince the court, something remains, doesn't it?
It does. There are two persistent problems here. First, law enforcement agencies might permanently keep the victim's name as an alias for the criminal in their internal databases. So your name is forever linked to that crime.
That's unbelievable.
And second, data aggregators, the third-party companies that supply info to background check services, they are notoriously slow to update their records if they do it at all.
So even if the court record is officially cleared,
the incorrect criminal history can just live on in these other systems for years, continuing to affect your job prospects, your housing options, and the source material mentions the very real psychological trauma that comes with that.
the crime is over, but the digital ghost of the crime just stays there, haunting your life. That's a profound system failure.
It really is. It shows that in our digital age, clearing your name isn't just about convincing one judge. It's about convincing hundreds of separate, independent databases.
Okay, let's transition to 2.3, synthetic identity theft. This one feels different. It's like an attack on the system itself, creating a phantom citizen.
That's a great way to put it. Synthetic identity theft is where the identities are either completely or partially fabricated. It's very technical, very surgical. The most common method is combining a real social security number.
Often a clean one, like from a child.
Exactly, a clean one, with a fake name and birth date that have no previous connection to the person whose SSN it is.
Why do that? Why create a fake person instead of just stealing a whole identity package? What makes this approach so insidious?
It's insidious because it exploits weaknesses in the credit granting algorithm. A completely stolen identity might trigger a fraud alert right away because, the address or spending habits suddenly change.
Right.
A synthetic identity, though, is a new identity. It lets the criminal slowly and methodically age that identity.
So they create the identity, they wait, and then they start building a fake but credible credit history.
Precisely. They start small, maybe with a little store credit card, and they pay the bills on time for months. They're essentially building a high-quality credit score on the back of a real SSN. This slow, steady activity bypasses a lot of the usual fraud detection systems.
So it sounds like this kind of fraud hurts the creditors who give out the big loans in the end, more so than the person whose SSN was used.
Initially, yes. The creditors are the main financial victims. But the individual whose SSN was stolen is still harmed. Since the synthetic identity is tied to their real SSN, the fraud might show up as some kind of anomaly on their credit file. It could even create a new subfile.
And if that subfile goes bad,
when the thief finally maxes out the credit and disappears, all that negative information can impact the real person's credit score. It can cause them to be denied for loans in the future. It's an attack on the institutional trust that's built around the SSN.
let's move on to 2.4, medical identity theft. This is where identity fraud becomes a direct threat to your actual health and safety.
This is a critical one. The first major analysis was done by a privacy researcher named Pam Dixon back in 2006, and she really highlighted the unique dangers here. The crime involves someone seeking medical care or getting prescription drugs using another person's identity or their insurance card.
The financial risk is obvious. You get fraudulent bills. But let's focus on that life-threatening dual harm the sources mentioned.
Right. Beyond the money, the thief's medical history, their diagnoses, treatments, their medications, even their allergies, it all becomes permanently mixed in with the victim's own medical record.
Which means a doctor, looking at that contaminated record, could make a disastrous clinical decision.
Absolutely. The research really emphasizes that this inaccurate information is incredibly difficult to correct in modern electronic health record systems. This contaminated history can affect your future insurability, and critically, it could cause a doctor to prescribe the wrong care.
Or rely on a false diagnosis.
Or give you a drug you're allergic to because the thief's allergy got entered into your file. It creates a direct and potentially fatal health hazard.
That puts a huge premium on medical data for cybercriminals. Why is medical PII reportedly so much more valuable than a credit card number?
It's exponentially more valuable because of its depth and its permanence. Medical data stored by hospitals or insurance companies contains decades of verified PII, combined with insurance details and often financial information.
It's a much richer data set.
It's a complete profile. And the sources say this data is worth up to 10 times more to cybercriminals than a standard credit card number, which has a much shorter shelf life before it gets canceled.
This high-stakes reality is what drove a regulatory change in the U.S., right?
It did. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, IPAY, was expanded. Now it requires medical breach notification if 500 or more people are affected. It was a direct attempt to force organizations to be more diligent about protecting this incredibly sensitive data.
Next up, 2.5, child identity theft. This one is really about stealing a future because the crime can sit there undetected for a decade or more.
It's one of the most long-term devastating forms. Children are targeted precisely because their social security numbers are clean. They have no credit history, so a fraudulent account opened under their SSN is unlikely to get flagged until that child, maybe at age 18, applies for a job or a student loan.
And that study we saw found that over 10% of children studied were victims. That is a staggering number.
It is. The FTC estimated that hundreds of thousands of children were victims back in 2008, often saddled with an average debt of nearly $13,000 to deal with when they finally discovered the fraud.
And that's not just a financial burden. It's a foundational challenge to their reputation that can take years to fix.
It can take a decade to unwind. And the research highlights that foster children are particularly at risk.
Why them specifically?
Because of the nature of the system. Their PII, especially their SSNs, get shared frequently among multiple agencies, social workers, government and non-government groups.
So more exposure.
A much higher exposure rate. And that's compounded by the fact that many of these kids transition out of the system without a strong support network, so they're often left all alone to try and fix the bad credit that was created for them.
And then there's the related crime, digital kidnapping.
This is a modern form of identity infringement that really exploits social media oversharing. Digital kidnapping is when someone steals online images of children, photos that parents share innocently, and then creates entirely fake digital stories misrepresenting those children as their own.
So it's not directly financial, but it's still a violation.
A significant violation of personal identity and privacy. It's creating a false history for a real person.
Our last two faces, 2.6, are identity cloning and concealment. What makes these different from the profit-driven financial crimes we've been talking about?
Cloning and concealment are mainly about establishing a false identity to hide the thief's true self. The goal is evasion, not necessarily to maximize credit or financial gain.
So if the motive isn't credit card fraud, what is it?
Motives vary, but they center on avoidance. It could be illegal immigrants trying to conceal their status, people hiding from creditors, or criminals trying to avoid warrants. The source also mentions posers, people who steal photos and personal histories to create fake personas on social media. The goal is just to appear as someone else.
And the big difference in detection is that these crimes don't have the obvious financial signals.
Exactly. Financial theft is noisy. It creates debt, collection calls, fraud alerts. Concealment, on the other hand, can go on forever without being detected, especially if the thief gets false credentials like a new driver's license. The victim might never know they've been cloned.
Until some critical life event forces it to the surface.
Right, like a job application that requires a deep background check.
Okay, we've mapped the 7 distinct faces. Together, they paint this picture of a pervasive, multi-layered threat. Now let's turn to Section 3, the threat ecosystem. If we want to defend ourselves, we have to understand how these identity pirates get and profit from our PII and what protective measures actually work.
Understanding the acquisition methods is vital because it gets rid of the idea that all identity theft requires some master hacker. It's often just a mix of low-tech garbage picking and high-tech intrusion.
Let's start with the low-tech physical methods. This is the stuff that should be easy to prevent, but it still happens.
Absolutely. The list includes physical theft of documents from cars, homes, offices. But the most common low-tech method is just stealing identity-related documents like bank statements and utility bills right out of your letterbox.
So shredding your mail and getting a locking mailbox is a huge first step.
A primary, indispensable defense.
Then we move into the social engineering and high-tech stuff.
This is where you have the phishing attacks. Those emails or texts designed to trick you into giving up your login details. It also includes the simple act of stealing checks, not to cash them, but to get the banking information off of them.
Account numbers, routing numbers.
All of it. And the material also highlights data aggregation. Criminals using public records, like electoral rolls, to gather foundational PII that they can then combine with partial data they get from a breach.
In social media, we post things that seem harmless, but it all adds up for a pirate.
Social media plays a really disturbing role here. The research notes that social security numbers can sometimes be guessed or pieced together just by combining information found on public profiles.
Like what?
Birthdays, addresses, pet names, mother's maiden names, graduation years. People are inadvertently handing over the puzzle pieces to attackers who specialize in pattern recognition.
And once a thief has your information, they need time to use it before you catch on. What's the immediate next step they take to create that delay?
The critical move is delay tactics. Identity thieves will frequently change the victim's contact details, their mailing address, phone number, email, to stop the victim from getting fraud alerts or notifications.
So the bank sends an alert, but it goes to the new fraudulent email address.
And the victim stays completely in the dark while the thief runs up debt.
And then there's the grim method you mentioned earlier, ghosting. Impersonating the dead.
Ghosting exploits the delay in administrative processes after a death. Thieves get information from death notices or obituaries and use the deceased person's PII to open new accounts. They're banking on the fact that agencies take time to be notified, and they're exploiting the inattentiveness of grieving families.
It's a crime against someone's final financial reputation.
It is.
Okay, let's talk defense. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission and Canadian recommendations all prioritize the guardianship of personal identifiers. What does that actually look like in practice?
It looks like risk avoidance. Actively choosing not to identify yourself unless it's absolutely necessary. It means recognizing that organizations shouldn't be demanding excessive PII.
So you should challenge them.
You have to challenge why they need your full SSN or driver's license number. Every time that data is stored in another database, whether it's your doctor's office or a retail loyalty program, the risk just grows exponentially.
And for those pieces of PII we must know, like in SSN, what's the best way to secure them?
A sound practice recommended in the material is to commit those critical identifiers to memory. This gets rid of the risk of someone finding them written down or stored on a device. And to help with this, the research suggests mnemonic techniques, like the major system.
We mentioned the major system earlier. How does that actually work to help you memorize a long number like in SSN?
The major system is brilliant. It converts numbers into phonetic sounds, which you can then use to build memorable words or phrases. Each digit corresponds to a consonant sound. So, for example, the digit 1 is a T, or D sound.
Because a T has one downstroke.
Exactly. 2 is N for 2 downstrokes, 3 is M for 3, and so on.
So if your SSN had a 3-2-1 sequence, that would be MNT.
Correct. You then add vowels between the consonants to form a word like minty, and you chain these words together into a memorable, often silly sentence. This leverages your brain's ability to recall images and words far better than it can recall random numbers.
That's a highly actionable technique.
Yeah.
Now, what about those commercial defense services you see advertised all the time? Do the sources endorse them?
They're heavily marketed, but the material says their value has been called into question. These services, which offer fraud alerts and credit monitoring, they're useful for detection, but they are not a substitute for aggressive prevention.
Let's look at the institutional side. Organizational failures. When corporations or governments drop the ball, the scale of risk just explodes. What are the key points of failure here?
The Privacy Rights Clearinghouse has tracked hundreds of breaches affecting hundreds of millions of records, and the failures fall into both low-tech and high-tech buckets. Low-tech failures include simple things like not shredding confidential papers before throwing them out.
Dumpster diving. It still happens.
It's still a persistent problem.
And on the high-tech side, what are the biggest corporate vulnerabilities?
Inadequate network security is the big one, of course, but also internal theft credit card numbers stolen by call center agents. But the most glaring failure, cited again and again in the research, is the theft of unencrypted laptops or portable media containing huge amounts of PII.
If the data isn't encrypted, A simple lost device instantly compromises millions of records.
Encryption is the absolute minimum standard. The sources also suggest advanced techniques like biometric identification using fingerprints could theoretically stop thieves, but that introduces its own complex technological and significant privacy concerns.
So what happens once all this PII is successfully stolen and aggregated? It doesn't just sit there. It enters a market.
It feeds a sophisticated, active, global market, mostly on darknet black markets. This is where criminal groups turn that raw data into weaponized assets. They increase the value of the raw data by aggregating it with publicly available information.
So they take the data from the breach and combine it with the open source info they got from electoral rolls or social media.
Exactly. They enrich the data. They create a complete identity profile name, SSN, mother's maiden name, address, maybe even recent purchases, which is far more valuable than the raw data alone. Then they sell this enriched data again for a higher profit.
So a simple data breach is just the opening bid in a complex, multi-stage attack.
Precisely. And this gets us back to that philosophical tension we noted earlier. The availability of public PII, even things like addresses and voting records, is essential for this data enrichment. It creates a seamless link between government transparency and the ease of criminal aggregation.
It does. Every time data is made public, even for good reasons, it just slightly lowers the bar for a criminal to complete an identity package. This tension is global, and it requires a global legal response, which brings us to Section 4, global response and legal consequences.
The U.S. legal framework has really been playing catch-up, getting stronger since the 90s. The foundation is the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act, or ITADA, passed in 1998.
What did ITADA do?
It was foundational because it defined a new type of crime. It made the unlawful possession or use of a means of identification a federal crime. This meant that the act of stealing the identity itself was federally prosecutable, not just the fraud that came after. It recognized identity theft as a crime against the person, not just against the bank.
And later, the government needed an even stronger tool for when ID theft was used to enable other serious crimes, the aggravated identity theft statute.
That's 18 U.S.C. Section Nuever 28A. It applies when identity theft is committed along with certain other felonies, like bank fraud or passport fraud. And the real punch of this law is that it mandates a consecutive sentence.
A consecutive sentence.
A mandatory extra 2 years of prison time stacked on top of the sentence for the main felony.
Wow. That forces prosecutors to charge the identity theft separately, rather than just seeing it as a side effect of the bigger crime. It really reinforces the seriousness.
It does. And beyond just prosecution, the U.S. has also enacted strong regulatory action for prevention, specifically the red flag guidelines.
We mentioned these. What exactly are the red flag guidelines?
They were developed by a joint task force of federal agencies. They require financial institutions, and this has been broadly interpreted to include most medical practices, utilities, telecom providers, to develop a written identity theft prevention program.
And this program has to be designed to detect and prevent patient identity theft.
Correct. It has to look for red flags.
What are some examples of these red flags?
Things like alerts for address discrepancies when someone is opening an account, suspicious documents, activity that doesn't match previous patterns, like a sudden flood of new credit applications, or attempts to use PII linked to a deceased person. The institutions have to have a plan, approved by their board, to respond the moment these red flags appear.
Yeah, so it shifts the protective burden firmly onto the organizations handling our PII.
That's the idea. And on the ground, state-level support has been crucial for helping victims. States like Indiana created a specialized identity theft unit to help victims navigate the recovery process. California's Office of Privacy Protection does similar work.
And we can't forget the importance of mandated transparency.
That's where notification laws come in. Many states followed California's lead in enacting mandatory data breach notification laws. This ensures that companies can't hide it when sensitive consumer information has been compromised.
It doesn't prevent the theft, but it guarantees you're informed.
So you can activate fraud alerts and start your own guardianship measures before that delayed weaponization phase begins.
Let's shift globally now, because this is a transnational crime, and that leads to some massive institutional gaps. The failure around Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is a perfect illustration.
That 2014 incident where 2 passengers boarded using stolen passports, it highlighted a shocking vulnerability. Interpol has a massive stolen and lost travel documents database. with 40 million records.
40 million records.
But Interpol's Secretary General reported that at the time, only a handful of countries were systematically using that database to screen travelers.
So the data was there, but it was largely unused in real-time screening. That is a massive security hole.
It is. It shows the failure often isn't a lack of data or tools, but institutional inertia. Now, if we look at penalties across the globe, the different philosophical approaches are immediately visible.
Let's compare some of the tough ones.
Australia, for instance, prohibits dishonest acts causing loss to a Commonwealth entity, and that's punishable by 5 years imprisonment. Canada has tiered penalties.
Based on intent.
Yes, knowingly possessing identity info for fraud can get you 5 years. But fraudulent personation, actually acting as the person to gain an advantage, that carries up to 10 years.
Europe varies. France has up to 5 years and a big fine, and the UK seems particularly unforgiving.
The UK courts call identity fraud a particularly pernicious and prevalent form of dishonesty, calling for deterrent sentences. This reflects the sheer volume of the crime there. It accounts for nearly half of all recorded frauds in the UK.
And Hong Kong.
One of the highest we saw, 14 years imprisonment.
India has a framework too.
Under their Information Technology Act, it's up to 3 years in prison and a fine. It shows a clear attempt to keep pace with the digitization of crime.
And finally, let's go back to the unique case of Sweden, which challenges our basic assumptions about data privacy.
Sweden is historically an open society, based on the principle of public access. This means that pretty much all information kept by public authorities, including your address, your taxes, your income, has to be available to anyone who asks.
That accessibility must have made fraud easier.
It did. And until late 2016, Sweden had few specific laws targeting identity theft itself. The government's priority on transparency created an environment that made data aggregation for pirates significantly simpler.
It highlights that severe friction between the values of absolute government transparency and the practical need for robust personal data security.
It really does.
Moving to Section 4.3, we have to talk about the personal impact. Fines and prison sentences for the criminals are one thing, but what is the ultimate price paid by the victims?
The emotional and financial strain is just crippling. Victims can face years of effort trying to prove their own identity to the legal system, to credit bureaus, to banks. And to add this complex layer of betrayal, the statistics show that most identity theft is perpetrated by a family member.
Oh, that's devastating.
It turns the fight for recovery into a profound psychological ordeal.
And to really bring this home, the well-publicized case of Michelle Brown's identity theft is the perfect illustration of how fast this can escalate from financial fraud to a life-shattering catastrophe.
Michelle Brown's testimony before the U.S. Senate detailed her experience. Her impersonator got over $50,000 in goods and services, the typical financial fraud, but then the impersonator got into drug trafficking.
And those consequences landed directly on Michelle Brown's record.
Precisely. She got an erroneous arrest record, had a warrant out for her arrest, and it got so bad that the criminal was booked under Mrs. Brown's name as an inmate in the Chicago federal prison.
So Michelle Brown spent years trying to prove she was not a drug trafficker who had served federal time.
That story just shows that the burden of proof, the years of effort, the lasting fear of being implicated in a crime you didn't commit, that is the true punishment of identity theft. The non-financial, institutional scars are often irreversible.
The highest price paid.
Without a doubt.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground. We've mapped the evolution of identity piracy from a simple financial crime to a systemic threat. We've detailed the 7 faces, and we've reviewed the global patchwork of legal responses.
And we've established that critical distinction. The financially common types, like financial and tax fraud, are often less personally damaging than the long-term existence-challenging types. Criminal, medical, and child identity theft. Those inflict lasting institutional trauma.
The primary actionable takeaway for you, the listener, reinforced by all the security advisories we've seen, is the crucial importance of aggressive guardianship of your personal identifiers.
Coupled with risk avoidance.
Don't over-identify yourself.
Yeah.
Use memory aids like the major system for critical numbers, and rigorously protect your physical documents.
And we have to close by acknowledging the ongoing disagreement among professionals about the true scale of this problem. While some U.S. studies suggested a decrease in victims and fraud value in the mid-2000s, the research we looked at highlights some serious skepticism.
The Microsoft report in particular was very vocal. It argued that survey-based estimates are hopelessly flawed and probably exaggerate the financial losses.
That's correct. But regardless of the disputed financial scale, the sheer personal cost is undisputed. The fact that the average time spent resolving the problem in one survey was estimated at 330 hours for victims, that just underscores the immense non-monetary price paid in time, effort, and stress.
As we close this deep dive, I want to come back to that tension we observed throughout this material, the friction between open access and private security, which was exemplified by Sweden's historical approach.
It poses a profound question for the future of digital governance.
How do we balance a society that seeks government transparency and data availability, that open society ideal, with the increasing and sophisticated risk of identity exploitation? Can a truly transparent state, where our fundamental PII is easily accessible for democratic accountability, ever offer robust personal privacy protections? Or is that a fundamental contradiction we just haven't resolved yet in the digital world?
That is the complex challenge facing legislators and technologists everywhere. The convenience of access, combined with the sophistication of exploitation, requires this continuous, often painful reevaluation of where that line between public interest and private security has to be drawn.
A negotiation that evolves daily.
And one we must all participate in.
A deep dive into identity piracy reveals not just a crime wave, but a constant negotiation between trust, transparency, and technology that affects every aspect of modern life. Thank you for mapping this complex terrain with us.